talk about the fool. First question, will there be a question on the leaving cert on the fool? Unlikely. Second question, well, Paul, why the hell are we studying him then? Well, because I think I could spend, I don't know, this won't take long at all, maybe less than 10 minutes, just going through some of the key moments associated with this character. So that if there is one of those questions that comes up where they ask about minor characters, the role of the fool or Albany or even Cornwall, we'll have a couple of paragraphs to write here. But also, of course, the fool's role helps us explore some of the broader aspects of the play. The play as an appealing 21st century, as a story which appeals to the 21st century. When we're talking about themes to do with blindness or appearance versus reality, deception, corruption, loyalty, betrayal, the fool plays a really interesting role, which allows us to make maybe valid points that other students won't make because they won't know this stuff. So the deeper our knowledge of the play, including relatively minor characters like the fool, the better prepared we are for the exam. So hopefully this won't be too much of a waste of your time. Remember, we're looking here at our paper 2 notes book. We go to the back of our King Lear section, somewhere around page 106, 107, and we'll see the full mind map. And when we go to that, the page looks slightly different than it does here. But you go and find that. We begin in the bottom left-hand corner. We have in the center of the page, our brilliant quote, "I am a fool, thou art nothing." I'll come to that in a few moments. And then we start with our first slide. So, the fool is Lear's court jester, okay? He first appears in Act 1, Scene 4, and from the very outset, it is clear that Lear is very fond of him. He calls him my pretty knave. So that's a very affectionate term that Lear uses toward the fool. This is Lear, who is the bombastic, arrogant bully of Act 1, but in Act 1, the affectionate bond between him and the fool is certainly evident. He is the fool's presence in the play is an example of Shakespeare's use of irony, because he's called the fool, and often his words seem like gibberish, but they're far from that. This is a man who possesses wisdom, and he hides that wisdom beneath a veil of buffoonery or idiotic, childish behaviour. When we encounter Kent in Act 1 is banished by Lear, but he decides to take on this disguise of Caius, and he comes to Lear's camp and he says, "Look, I want to work for you, my lord." And the fool hands Kent, or Caius, his coxcomb or his hat, which is a symbol of his trade and his status as a fool, as a gesture. And Kent says, "Well, why are you giving me that cap?" And the fool responds with, "Why, this fellow has banished 2 of his daughters, and did the third a blessing against his will. If thou follow him, thou must needs wear my coxcomb." Now, that quote, I know you won't learn it, even though I'd love you to, because I love the play. But that quote kind of sums the fool up for me. I think most of you, when you're reading that, will go, what does that mean? This fellow has banished 2 of his daughters and did the third. It sounds like gibberish. It sounds like nonsense. But in fact, there's a really clear, insightful understanding evident in that quote. Because what the fool is saying is, Lear, I'm not the fool, Lear's the fool. Lear has alienated 2 of his daughters, so banished 2 of his daughters. That's Goneril and Regan, by abdicating, handing them power, and then creating a situation whereby they feel that he's going to try to take the power back. So that creates a vacuum, or sorry, a tension in that relationship. And then he banished Cordelia. But the fool says, Lear, in doing that, did Cordelia a favour. He gave her a blessing against his will. In other words, he was trying to punish her by banishing her, but in fact he did her a favour by getting her out of Britain, because the fool can see what's coming. The fool is not blind, whereas Lear is blind. And then when he talks to Kent, and he knows that Caius is volunteering to work for Lear, he says, well, if you're volunteering to work for Lear, you must be a fucking idiot. You must be a fool. And that's why he says, if you follow him, you must needs wear my coxcomb. So when it comes to blindness or appearance versus reality, there's loads to say there. But when it comes to loyalty, we can see that the fool understands from the beginning that remaining faithful to Lear is an act of folly, and yet he never abandons Lear, and that makes him emblematic of, symbolic of, all that is good in humanity. Loyalty, fidelity. The fool is a symbol of those positive qualities. He is Lear's court jester, so he can make jokes and kind of get away with them, and he can insult Lear when other people can't insult Lear. But there's a really, really, really striking moment in Act 1, Scene 4, when he also offers Lear his coxcomb. And Lear says, dost thou call me fool, boy? Are you calling me a fool? And it's a bit of banter, it's a bit of crack, it's a light moment. But the fool's response is really cutting, but also highly intelligent. He says, well, all thy other titles thou hast given away. Now it's a moment where, depending on how the part is being played, the fool could come across there as being a real vindictive, unpleasant person there. Oh, yeah, you're a tick because you gave away all your titles. But I don't think that adds up it doesn't correlate with everything else that we know about the fool. What we know about the fool is he loves Lear. What we know about the fool is that when Lear's out in the storm on his own, raging, broken, it's the fool who tries to comfort Lear, who stays with him. So to say that he's being deliberately hurtful towards Lear there, it doesn't tally with what we know about the fool from the rest of the play. So we have to look again at that quote. And for me, what the fool is doing, yes, he is using humour, and yes, that humour does cut, but I think what the fool is doing is trying the best he can to get Lear to see what he's done. Lear can't see that the abdication, the transfer of power, was an act of folly. He doesn't understand that his daughters won't obey him because he's their dad, even though he's no longer their king. He doesn't get that not everybody worships him the way he worships himself. And I think what the fool is doing here is trying to kind of gently, through humour, bring Lear to a point of realisation so that he doesn't end up in conflict with Goneril and Regan. Because the fool knows what Lear can't see, that if there is conflict with Goneril and Regan, it's not going to work out well for Lear. He tells Lear, thou madest thy daughters thy mothers, for when thou gavest them the rod and puttest down thy own breeches. Now, again, this is part of that interaction in Act 1. And again, it's him pointing out to Lear what he's done. But lads, isn't that a brilliant example of Shakespeare's use of language and imagery? The image of the schoolboy who's in trouble and he's going to get punished. So this is in the 16th century. So he's going to get a slap on the arse, and he's like pulling down his trousers to prepare to be punished. It's a really interesting piece of imagery by Shakespeare. But what it does is it captures in such a powerful way the transfer of power, and power is an important theme in this play. And the fool is saying, when you abdicated, you made your daughters your mothers. In that relationship, the mother is supposed to be the person in authority, and the daughter is supposed to be the obedient child. What the fool is saying is, when you were king, you had power, and your daughters had no choice but to be obedient. But now they are the parent. In other words, they have the power, and you are the powerless child. You have created a situation which has turned authority upside down. Again, why is the fool saying this to Lear? Is he saying it because he wants to be cruel and wants to cause harm and upset and, because he's bitter and vindictive? No, none of those things. He's trying to get Lear to see the truth, because the fool can see what's coming. And what's coming is a conflict with Goneril and Regan, which is not going to be good for Lear. And the fool loves Lear and wants to try to protect him. Lear, when that conflict does come with Goneril, Goneril is annoyed because of the behaviour of Lear's retinue. And Lear patronises and mocks Goneril. And he says, "How now, daughter? What makes this frontlet on? What have you got that face on you for? What's wrong with you? Turn your frown upside down. Methinks now thou art too much of late in the frown." So Lear's like kind of laughing at Goneril, saying, "What's wrong with you? What's the problem, man? What's the problem?" But the fool, he knows that Lear shouldn't be making jokes or making any comment about Goneril, because she has all the power. And he says, "Thou wast a pretty fellow when thou hadst no need to care for her frowning." And again, if you're writing about power or you're writing about the blindness themes, you're looking at these moments of insight which demonstrate or appearance versus reality. This guy is called a fool. He appears to be, a character who is not serious. He's a very serious man. He's a very intelligent man. The great Lear is the fool, while the fool is the wise man. Things are not what they appear to be in the world of this play. When Lear decides to go to Regan, having broken with Goneril and said into her womb conveys sterility, the fool tries to warn Lear not to expect any kind of different treatment, any kind of more welcoming experience from Regan. And he tells Lear, "Thou shalt see thy other daughter will treat thee kindly." He's being sarcastic there. "For though as she's as like this as a crab is like an apple, yet I can tell what I can tell." And again, that's a great example of the type of language that the fool uses, which leads people not to like him, to find him confusing and difficult to understand, because he speaks in this kind of cryptic cipher that has to be decoded because it sounds like rubbish. But look at what he's saying there. He's saying, your other daughter is not going to treat you any better than Goneril. You think they're as different as a crab, a crustacean, is from an apple. You think that Goneril and Regan couldn't be more different. That Goneril is disrespectful and has no sense of gratitude to you for all you've given her. But Regan, she loves you, and she'll be so angry with Goneril because of the way that you've been treated. You're wrong, Lear, because there is such thing as a crab apple, and a crab apple is like a cooking apple. In other words, you're going to find out that those two daughters are not different, but in fact, they are exactly the same. And he says, I know what I know. So again, a highly intelligent observation delivered by the fool, trying to warn Lear of what's coming, but doing so unsuccessfully. He tells Lear, thou should not have been old before thou hadst been wise. And those poignant words really do begin to have an impact on Lear, but also on the audience, as the mood of tension rises as we can see Lear approaching the moment of climax in Act 2, Scene 4, approaching that great confrontation with Regan and Goneril, but also approaching emotional and psychological breakdown when he says, oh, let me not be mad, not mad, sweet heaven, keep me in temper, I would not be mad. For me, the fool is like he's a great resource of wonderful quotable lines. And the best line he speaks in the play is spoken to Kent in Act 2, Scene 4, that climax scene. Is it Scene 4? Could be Act 2, Scene, I think it is Scene 4. Anyway, it's in Act 2, when he comes across Kent in the stocks, and he says to Kent, listen man, don't stay loyal to this Lear fella. Anybody who stays loyal to this Lear fella is going to suffer, because he's spiraling out of control. And he says, let go thy hold when a great wheel runs down a hill, lest it break thy neck with following it. There we have again the fool's perceptive insights. He's saying, look, Lear's out of control. Anybody stays loyal to him is going to get crushed. That's what's going to happen. He knows that. He knows that Lear, he can see again what Lear cannot see. He understands the truth of what Lear is going to experience. He knows the smart move will be to abandon the old king, but he won't do that. So he is loyal and he stays with Lear. He says, I will tarry, the fool will stay. As the play progresses and Lear moves towards tragedy and redemption, the fool's role diminishes. In fact, he appears in Act 4 with Lear